Wonderful to have you here. You're a Yale undergrad,
Yes, class of 73.
class of 73. Last time when I saw the interview that you did it with Doug Gray, you compared a bit class of 73 or around that time in sensibilities with today's Yale college. Would you feel uncomfortable doing that again?
Well, I have a it's somewhere between anecdotal and systematic database, so it's a limited number of interactions, and maybe things have changed much in year to year. But when I was going to Yale, anyone who had any talent, which did not include me at the time, either was becoming a doctor or a lawyer. And a lawyer not to be a paid mercenary for clients, but a lawyer to be someone who would apply the law in a positive way, make changes for the better for the country. So it's much more like a doctor than today's lawyers who are more like, I don't know, paramilitary.
And so you think that all the today's college students tend to be less oriented toward?
Well, just my sampling last year, everyone was going to work for a hedge fund or Morgan Stanley or something, and and the smartest people too. So having come out of finance, I had a very jaundiced point of view, but based not on prejudice, but based on 25 years of experience as to the social benefits, if any, or social detriments, in my view, to the smart people becoming financial engineers, quote unquote, as opposed to real engineers, real doctors, or judges or something. So I have is it prejudice if your consistent experience, direct and indirect, is that a certain type of a group of people deal with life in a certain way? I don't think it is after a while. So if it can be if you have self-fulfilling prophecy issues, but I think if there's consistent indirect experience, then I don't think it's a prejudice. And so I have
at least non-prejudicial observation can be contested, but nonetheless it's an important observation. So from Yale you went to Harvard Business School, and
actually there's an interesting. You were talking about excellence. Excellence. Well, when I heard you use you used the phrase moral excellence.
I did, yeah.
That was one aspect of my ending up in business school. It's rather humorous, actually, I suppose, is that I actually toyed with going into the ministry, but in talking about excellence, we want excellence, but we don't want perfectionism. And I was perfectionistic, so I decided that I would have to take the responsibility of what might happen in eternity to a group of souls, which I wasn't sure I wanted to take. And also, I looked at the things like Gospel of Luke, and I looked at the injunctions that Jesus had for his followers, and in I would say literal, some people would say simplistic way, applied those and decided that was not my bag either, having grown up in upper middle class comfort.
You went to Harvard Business School, had a whole career, but then you returned after your retirement. Then you returned to divinity school.
Yes.
After you couldn't do so much harm.
Or
didn't need to get employed.
After I glutted myself on others' flesh. No, so I. Yeah, so after a while I got tired of feasting. So I went to Harvard Business School, and I had, and anyone could get in back then. It really was a lot much easier. I mean, that's not an understatement. It really was not hard to get in, and ended up gravitating to finance because finance required no common sense whatsoever, a certain sneakiness maybe, but no common sense, and so I ended up going into finance and went to Aetna Life and Casualty and their bond investment department until my then wife announced either she could leave Hartford or we could leave Hartford. So being young and foolish, I said, well, maybe this has a chance. So I went and I ended up joining the private placement area at a wonderful firm called Kuhn Loeb, the first of many I've worked for to go under. Some with better sort of optics than others.
Yeah.
So anyway, I got into investment banking sort of. I meandered in.
But your idealism with which you read those Gospels and the idealism that prevented you into going into ministry didn't quite leave you
No.
as you entered the world of finance. You ended up at Enron. Can you tell a little bit about how you or how you got there, what you did there, and
Sure.
why were you that fly in the ointment of Enron, and how?
Right. Well, basically, I was fired from my previous job, where my boss announced I had a, quote, uneconomic attachment to quality, unquote, which at first, and you won't believe because it sounds so stupid, I was sort of feeling pretty good about this. All of a sudden, I realized this is the worst thing you could say about anyone. And, so I took my quixotic approach elsewhere. My quixotic approach, of course, was just basic honesty. I mean, in other words, what's perfectionistic? How do we define perfectionistic? And perfectionistic obviously might be various elements of the Sermon on the Mount, but perfectionistic in business, unless you are quite lucky or quite smart, ends up being whether or not you are basically honest. And that's when your motivation becomes so important, because you either have to have motivation as a result of religion or family conditioning, or you might say philosophy, whereas a business philosophy, you've come to certain conclusions about what works in the long term. And I ended up having at least a little bit of the religion, although it was pretty far afield in some ways. A lot of the family conditioning, where I didn't want to put a blot on the family escutcheon, and ultimately a philosophical attitude where I reconciled in my own mind, at least to my own satisfaction, the creation of value, as it's understand purely economic terms, through adherence to certain basic live, let live, do unto others within a group of people within your own corporation.
And that ended up what you tried to implement in Spinnaker. We'll come to this, but before we go to Spinnaker,
Enron.
we want Enron.
So I'd been basically fired from a job, and so I hung out a shingle and did my corporate finance consulting services. I didn't want to be paid by transaction, because what very often tends to happen, not certainly, but most people, you get paid by transaction, where usually you actually know a lot more than the client. The client thinks they know, but they don't. And so that can easily be turned into a situation where you're just gleefully stealing money from clients. But if you're really a lot smarter than they are, you can do it without them ever really knowing. And that happens a lot in investment banking, and both the trading side and the investment banking side. And God help us now in infecting entire banks, which is why we haven't really fixed our problems. But anyway, I was paid only for yearly services, which is much less lucrative, but happier. There's no conflict between me and the client. I don't have to worry about maintaining separation, playing any information games. As a result, of course, no one wants that niche, because you can't make huge amounts of money. And so I had no competition to speak of. But I was doing that for about 2 years after I got fired. My wife never wants me to say that, but that's what happened. And one of the clients I dealt with was Enron, because I had helped finance them, when they were put together, when they were a merger.
So what year are we talking about now?
I started working with them in late '93.
Okay.
And then in early '94, I started to work.
So they were then on.
They were absolute top.
Absolute top. That's right.
I'm sure Fortune probably had them on as the most admired corporation in the country. So I went to work for their CFO, because they were getting proposals from banks and investment banks, every type of proposal coming over the transom every day, and the guy was just sort of swamped. And and he asked me to help them just figure out what made basic sense. And I was doing that for about 6 months before I ended up working on this project where they were going to take all their international pipelines and power projects and roll them up into a public company and sell half of it to the public. And I ended up working on that for, I guess, 9 months.
So when I heard you tell the story, you were flying in a small jet to Argentina.
Yeah.
And then you had an epiphany of sorts.
A nasty epiphany. What's
Yeah.
a nasty epiphany? Nasty funny or something. It's we were flying down to Argentina to look at our Argentine pipeline, and the chief operating officer was talking up some of his projects. He wanted to sell my little public company, and I think he was expecting basically that he would be able to sell it to us on about a 10% nominal after-tax discount rate, which is the sort of thing you'd expect for a very low-risk project in the United States, as opposed to, Dominican Republic, where they occasionally pay their bills but often don't.
Mm-hmm.
And, I worked
Which is
on-
where that property or whatever, that's where it was.
He was talking up the Dominican Republic project
Yeah.
and saying how great it was, and literally all I said was, well, from the point of view of EPP, the little public company, I never got any further than that because he launched into a tirade for the next 45 minutes. We, us, me. And then he started screaming these things, his little veins bulging, and he made it clear that any such talk was beyond anathema, that it was going to be dealt with in the most violent way. So that was about a month after we went public. I said, "Oh my Lord!"
And so that was an Enron guy, and you were right.
Oh yeah. So I mean,
Explain a little bit
yeah,
the
that's a good
relationship
point.
between this between the company that you were running,
Yeah.
which was kind of Enron 51% owned, right? Is
Excellent point.
that right? Okay.
Enron owned 51% of Enron Global Power and Pipelines. The public, the minority, owned 49%.
Yeah.
So it was highly improper for the majority owner to start to browbeat an officer whose loyalties must remain with the minority owner, minority owners, and it was just amazingly improper behavior, both psychologically as well as legally. And the first of many attempts to abuse the process, basically to benefit the parent, Enron, at the expense of the minority.
And so, is this the case in point where, who's there to look out for the interest of the shareholders in the context of management? You tried to do that, and you were effectively shut down. Is that what happened?
Yeah,
I'm completely.
Yeah,
ignorant
no,
of
it's
those
very gnarled and complicated, but basically that was the starting point.
Yeah.
And then whenever Enron needed to make quarterly earnings, which there was always a last minute mad dash to get a penny over the analyst estimates, the last couple of weeks they were always looking for things, and they would, try to dun us with this expense that really was properly theirs and make it ours. And of course, if you take a $10 million expense, which Enron should pay, and they make my little company pay, and you do the math, instead of having to pay $10 million, they pay, in effect, $5.1 million. So they've gained 4.9 million, and if you
Right.
multiply that about 10 times over, that's what they're trying to do. And either I was negotiating with the COO of Enron, who was also on the EPP board, or I was negotiating with my direct boss, who was the CFO of, actually he's the president of EPP, and he was also employed by Enron. So and he determined my bonus. It sounds stupid, but here's the thing: is that I thought when I joined the the subsidiary, I said, well, they can't fool around with this. They live and die by being able to take these companies public. If they foul this up, they're going to drastically limit their access to future such spinoffs. But I hadn't really counted on the legerdemain of the lawyers who are involved, because with appropriate disclosure or non-disclosure, you can cover over any abuses. And so it, that's when I say that, at least in my career, I didn't deal with engineering. I didn't deal with a lot of disciplines like that. I dealt with finance, and in finance, if you're basically honest, when I started in finance in 1975, that was typical. But by the time I left, that was almost unique. And I think of Al Gore's frog in the slowly heating water, and in this case, the whole environment was shifting from basic ethics to basic lack of ethics.
Now, why tell about that shift now. How, as you look at this shift now, or as you have experienced it from where you were sitting, why was that shift? What caused it? What motivated it? What propelled it?
Well, I think there was a basic ideological shift in the whole country, and to a certain extent, we have many benefits, economic benefits, but there are some downsides. The basic ideological shift is that government is superfluous, and that basically private enterprise can do everything, and it can do it better, and the magic of the market will assure that everything's perfectly allocated, and because of reputation concerns, people will always do the right thing, and unfortunately, even the regulators believe that. So what you had was the illusion of regulation, worse than no regulation. If you have no regulation, you're safer than if you have the illusion of regulation.
Right.
Just like if you have, better to have no laws than to have laws which then highly paid lawyers can figure out how to get around, because then people think they're laws. There aren't laws in a lot of cases. My father used to be a lawyer. He's about the only lawyer I ever knew that didn't make a lot of money. And I thought about that. And why would anyone pay a lawyer a lot of money to basically tell you to follow in spirit and to the letter what the law is? That's not what you pay a lawyer for. You pay a lawyer to get around the law. So it really is one of these things that just shocks me. And I'm basically a moderate Republican, but it was a shock to me that anyone would think that we didn't need the SEC, for example, to police what was going on. Because without countervailing pressures like that, people will be tempted to do the wrong thing because there's an asymmetric payoff.
So one element, I've heard you rightly, one element was kind of a large framework of thinking about economy as a whole, kind of in a sense of kind of undiluted belief in a completely free market. Connected with that was push toward deregulation, right?
Right. And some of the part of the deregulation, had immediately and long-term beneficial effects, like the breakup of the fixed rates for stock commissions, which had prevailed for hundreds of years before the SEC broke that up. And that took really what was sort of a gentleman's game in terms of investment banking, and really made it into a much more of a free-for-all, which would have been okay, but for other types of deregulation, which then took something from being sort of, you might say, again, an elegant, slow-moving game into, a particularly huge version of a Worldwide Wrestling Federation or something.
You in your interview that I've heard before, you also mentioned, and in our conversations, you mentioned also that there's something peculiar about the character of corporation, as opposed to partnership, which lends itself.
Well, is
that right or not?
Well, it's slightly different than that, and that is the big break for me is not corporation versus, for example, a general partnership or proprietorship where you have unlimited liability. The big break is between a privately held corporation and a publicly held corporation, because I know I have some family, I know people who own family corporations where they make very long-term arrangements, enter into long-term sorts of policies which really are built around reputation, which often you either coincidentally or non-coincidentally are reinforced by ethics, but they really do the right thing. Because in the long term, they expect that if they do the wrong thing, it'll come back to haunt them. Maybe not next year and 5 years, but in the long term, it'll come back to haunt them. And it's a family corporation. They expect it to be around for 100 years. Let's assume that you have a different situation where if you can, beat your estimates by a penny by reversing various reserves over the course of a year, and convince people that you're on a roll. You're really you're really doing just a great detailed job blocking and tackling, when in fact you're just fudging the numbers. But such is the public market that most of the people who invest in public market are unaware of what's going on and unaware of how little they know about what's going on. They push the stock up, and you just made $50 million. Well, are you going to worry about 100 years from now if you just made $50 million? No, at least most people aren't. I suppose if you were a value maximizer and you say, well, it's 50 million this year, but I want to make unlimited amounts of money and it's based on my reputation. Well, maybe those people exist. I never met them. If I make 50 million bucks this year, that's enough. And I'm not going to worry about what happens to my reputation, because a lot of times for weak-minded people, you'll be able to convince them of untruths quite plausibly, and they'll go around believing you still have a good reputation. So anyway, that's the bad. That was, let's shift to the positive.
I want to stay with bad a little
Okay,
bit.
let's stay with bad.
A little bit longer. And
Oh,
then
yeah, sure.
one more thing, which I think what we discussed, which I thought was very important, and that is, once you come now to more personal character of the decision making. At one point you talked. Well, you mentioned. Well, sometimes you think. Well, there is an edge to which you come, and then there's nothing.
There's no edge.
And there's no edge. Talk about there not being an edge.
Well, there's my experience at least is that most people assume that they will walk to the edge of a moral precipice and look down and see, oh my God, that's the result. What really happens, they're on some sort of egg, and it gets steeper and steeper and steeper, but they're always saying, well, I can maintain my balance in spite of the fact I'm taking more and more and more risky actions in terms of ethics or questionable actions. And it's like the frog. People gradually are descending into an unstable situation ethically in terms of their approach to life, and they don't even know it because because everyone else is similarly descending, or else because their powers of rationalization are sufficient to offset the changing terrain. And and a lot of people, it really is, what is everyone else doing? It's like alcoholics like to, stick together because you're not drinking more than anyone else is. Well, the same way with people who have bad ethics. Well, I'm no worse than Joe or Pete. We're all doing the same thing. So the norm, so what's defined as norm is just looking around the room, as opposed to any sort of norm which incorporates a broader notion of what it means to be human.
Right. Okay, you want to go to positive, right? And the positives, that's very good. I think we need the positives. Positive. The positive side is then what you did when you left Enron, and that's you had a.
Well, I left Enron at the same time as the controller and the general counsel did, which ended up not being disclosed, all over the same issue, and that is they wanted to take our accounting group away from us and bill us back the cost, but have them to report to Enron. So it was one of these ridiculous gambits, and they did that without ever disclosing any of this. But So I and the general counsel and the controller left the same time in something like October '95. And in '96, I helped a friend start a oil and gas company, mostly gas, because gas is easier to find, in the Gulf at least. Oil and gas company, exploration company, and worked there for 5 years. 2 years ago, it ended up being sold to Norsk Hydro, a big Norwegian oil and gas company. And in the meantime, we had basically a 12 to 1 return to our equity holders with no debt at the start. And, which by Silicon Valley standards is nothing, but by old economy standards is a good, very good return.
Good for me.
So it's but the important points about Spinnaker is that, when you're starting a company, there are lots of questions. Well, how do I structure that? And how do I look at, and the good news is anytime we had any doubt about what to do, I literally said to myself, what would Enron do? And we do the reverse. And, for example, we were honest in our disclosures to the public. We were honest in our disclosures to our employees. We made sure that the employees knew that we were all in this together. We had a weekly meeting. It'd be 8 a.m. on Monday morning where we'd go through everything the company was doing with all the employees. We had told them we were not going to talk to them about any impending mergers, but we were not going to have a merger in which we were not the successor company in control. So that they didn't, we told them we were not going to talk about that, but not to worry, and we meant it. What ended up happening, I believe, is that we solved the problem that bedevils so many companies, and that is, you might say, sub-optimization, where people are really just looking for their own good and gaming the system, and lack of information flow. So basically, employees, like some of the children I've met, don't care what you say, they care what you do. They don't care about your mission statement. Enron had a beautiful mission statement. They care what do you do, and that sets the tone. If you're lying to people, or if you're engaging in sexual harassment as a top manager, they'll see, okay, now I understand what the ethics are, and I'll apply them in my own way. And so we ended up with an ethical culture, a truth-telling culture, and that's the reason that's important, is that for most companies, the real problem is information. That is and making sure information flows to the top, and the information flows back down again. And that is a huge problem in most corporations, especially slow-growing corporations, as people start to battle it out. And we felt that was the most important thing we could do, is establish that type of environment, and we were willing to work hard to do that. And there are some trade-offs, because in the short term, and if you're really short-term oriented, which a lot of public companies are, better to sort of fuzzy up some of your disclosure if there are problems, or cover it over, because if you can just get through a hard period,
right.
then surely your business will rise, and you will never have had to talk about that well that blew up or something. And so there has to be bite to the concept for it to be respected.
So that's one area. The other area you talked about, kind of development of your employees. The idea that no matter what happened with the company, you
Right.
wanted them to
Right. Benefit from having been there. We startups are notoriously risky. A lot of them fail. We wanted to make sure that if we failed, that each and every employee that dedicated at least a portion of their career to us, sacrificed other opportunities, would not regret having come. So we made sure that we gave each and every employee either the tools or the training or both to be worth more with each passing year than they were before, and it became our problem to make sure they were compensated appropriately. So we didn't want to have someone in a slot and leave them there. We wanted to challenge them, which would then challenge us by being better all the time.
And what kind of that seems so noble, and what were the difficulties in the process of doing this? You mentioned 48 hours of migraine at one point.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, there are difficulties, but I tend to worry too much. And in my case, I was worried that I might have some lack of perfection, which would somehow cost some of my employees a lot of money because we had them compensated with company stock and options. And for a lot of them, it was probably exclusive of their house, 80% or more of their net worth. And so I was always worried that if I didn't handle things perfectly, somehow it might come back to bite them. It wouldn't be a problem for me, but it'd be a huge problem for them. One of the issues, and there are many issues in this, with weaknesses in our financial system, but one of them is that most of the people who invest most of the public money really have no idea what they're doing. And you know, it's not a Warren Buffett will be able to, or Peter Lynch will be able to assess a company's strategy, assess the ability of management and the capital structure to affect that strategy, and make a reasoned decision. But that's 1 in a million. Most of the people managing the public's money, you know, only know whether you've beaten your quarterly estimates. If you've beaten them, they buy. If you haven't, they sell, and sometimes they sell a lot very quickly. If we'd missed our quarterly estimates, I think our stock would have been down 20-30% in a week. We came close to missing our estimates one time. One quarter, it was just the last day that we made our estimates. And I had a 48-hour migraine and worrying about that. Some companies can create estimates that they can beat at will. And the way they do that is merely by creating bogus reserves, which are then reversed whenever they want the earnings. So they smooth out, which is otherwise a volatile earning stream, creating a false sense of calm and a false sense of low risk. And so in our case,
you couldn't do that.
We couldn't, both by, and I don't want to pat myself on the back, both by personal inclination and also by the youth of the company, we couldn't do that. We actually had to live or die by our estimates. But here's the next problem, and that is, while we projected mediocrity to the outside world that demanded excellence internally, if you project mediocrity occasionally, you won't even achieve that. Maybe it's only 5% of the time, but you know, this well and this well and this well will all have problems, and maybe there's only a 1 in 1,000 chance, but you'll miss mediocrity. But if you ever miss an estimate, it's felt to be sort of a violation of whatever covenant exists between the investors and the company, because most of them cannot even begin to understand any explanation and don't have the time or inclination to do so. So in my case, that was the problem, was I ended up worrying too much. However, I think the course of the company was clear and the attitudes were clear, and they ended up continuing after I retired after 5 years at the company. Loved it, but I said, well, it's a 48-hour migraine now. It'll be a coronary in 10 years. I don't need the money. Further money will not correlate with more happiness, so I packed it in.
Off to divinity school.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Jim. We'll take a break for about 10 minutes, and then we'll return for general discussion.